All right, hello everybody, and welcome to yet another A plus 1101 CompTIA practice quiz. Today we're going to be doing something exciting. We're going to be doing a performance-based question, which we will find in any of the practice exams here. I'm just going to pick one at random, and we are also going to do a multiple choice question from every single exam objective. I'm talking 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 plus a performance-based question. It's going to be a good one, and hopefully it should give you a little bit of an idea as to how ready you are for the real thing. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's just go ahead and jump straight into it. We are going to begin with our first question, and it's a performance-based question. I'm going to read this out, and then I'll walk us through it afterwards. So let's go ahead and get started. The question reads, you are responsible for setting up 3 separate RAID configurations. You must choose the correct amount of drives, the correct speed, and the correct storage space depending on the given requirements. Additionally, you must label the RAID configuration as either RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 10. Each storage drive can be used as many times as you need. Now, in the actual question, you'll be given 3. In this little excerpt, we're just going to do 1. I'm going to give you a little snippet. So, the configuration that we need to configure is the following. This RAID configuration needs to be as budget-friendly as possible while still meeting the requirements. Latency is not a concern, and the customer cannot afford the use of a parity bit in order to achieve redundancy. This RAID configuration should provide the client with a RAID configuration that offers data striping and a moderate amount of storage space considering the available drive options. Feel free to pause and have a read of that again if you need to. We're going to go ahead and have a look at what we're working with here. Okay, so on the left-hand side here, we have a box labeled configuration 2, and we have 4 potential slots that we can slot drives into. It's up to us to choose from the drives over on the right-hand side which drives we're going to use and how many of those drives we are going to use. So, you have some larger drives, some medium-sized drives, and some smaller drives. You have drives with very low RPM or high latency, and you also have drives with very high RPM with very low latency. Pause the video here if you need to think about this for a while. I'm going to go straight into the answer now. So if you need to pause the video, pause it. I'll leave it up to you to set that pace. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at the answer for this one in 3, 2, 1. Here is our answer. So we have gone with a RAID 0 configuration. We have used 2 drives for that configuration. And each drive is a moderate size. So we had some smaller drives, some large drives, and we had the one in the middle. We chose the medium-sized drives in terms of how much they could store. And we went with drives with the lowest range of RPM, because the question specified that we weren't too concerned about latency. So let's go ahead and read through the explanation for this answer now. I'll read it out to you, then we'll talk a little bit more about it. The question specified that the RAID configuration needed to be budget-friendly, so it needed to be cheap, right? And that they could not afford a parity bit. This rules out a RAID 5 and RAID 10 configuration, as RAID 5 uses a parity bit. So, of course, you can't use RAID 5 because they have specifically told you they don't want a parity bit. And RAID 10 is the most expensive option out of all of them. If they specify a low budget, they're almost certainly not going to be able to afford a RAID 10, okay? This leaves RAID 0 and RAID 1 as the only remaining option. So based on what we know so far, the only remaining options are RAID 0 and RAID 1. The customer then goes on to specify that they need data striping. Okay, they need data striping. They must have that. And that means RAID 0 is the only option remaining because RAID 1 mirrors data, but it does not stripe it. So that's how we came to that conclusion of RAID 0 is the only answer we could possibly do. We need striping out of RAID 0 and RAID 1. RAID 0 is the only one that stripes, so we have to go with RAID 0. Latency is not a concern, which is why we went with the low RPM, because, right, they're on a tight budget. If latency isn't a concern, we're going to go for as little latency as possible. And budget is a concern, so they want it cheap. Latency is not a high priority, but a cheap RAID configuration is. So therefore, low RPM or high latency drives. So the lowest RPM drives should be chosen. So that's our explanation for that one. Feel free to go back and have a read. There's some more information on the slide here in front of you that you can look at if you feel like that's something you need to do. I'm not going to read that out, but in essence, for this question and for any performance-based questions you might get in relation to RAID drives for the A+ 1101 exam, you're going to need to know the difference between RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 10, and not just know the difference, but know in what situation is each configuration the most appropriate. You're probably going to be given some sort of scenario where you have to choose based on a set of requirements which one you want to set up. It might not be that in-depth. You might not have to choose RPM, or you might not have to choose every little detail, but it's better to be able to do it and not need it than it is to need it and not be able to do it. So make sure you know your RAIDs inside and out. Let's go ahead and move on to our first multiple choice question from exam objective 1. The question reads, you are considering purchasing a new monitor and have been researching the different types of display technologies available. You are particularly interested in getting accurate colors and a good balance between performance and quality. Which type of LCD display technology should you consider based on your requirements? A. TN. B. IPS. C. VA. D. OLED. Your answer coming up. Feel free to pause the video if you need to in 3, 2, 1. The answer is IPS, otherwise known as in-plane switching, and I'll read the explanation for that out now. In-plane switching is a type of LCD display technology known for providing the best color representation and excellent viewing angles. It offers more accurate colors and better color consistency across different angles compared to other LCD technologies. However, it is important to note that in-plane switching displays are generally more expensive than twisted pneumatic displays due to their advanced features. So, right, considering that they're more expensive, if you get a question asking you to consider budget, that's something you have to take into consideration. Now, there's some more information here on what the go is with the other options there. So it tells you what a twisted pneumatic is, what a VA is, what an OLED is, right there on your screen. Pause the video if you want to read those, but we're not going to sit here and read through every single slide because we don't want to be here all day. Now, I recommend for things to this effect where you're having to tell the differences between multiple things, if you can try to draw out a table, I find it easy to try to conceptualize that information. So I've got a table here. This table is an excerpt from my learning guide. You can grab my learning guide for only $5 over at journeytosaber.com. Okay, enough plugging myself. You should be able to draw out this table essentially from memory, not copying it off of the screen, but turn your screens off. You should be able to draw it out. If you can do that, you'll be able to answer any questions about this with absolutely no problem at all. So you've got the pros and the cons of each different type of display. You've got the situation in which it is generally used there. That's everything you really need to know for the exam. Okay. Exam objective number 2. Let's go. Multiple choice question. The question reads, before we get to it, guys, this is a big one. Now, I've tried to make some of these questions really, really hard so that you can't guess your way through them. If you guess this answer correctly, you must be some sort of absolute magician, because the only way to get this right confidently is to know your ports, your protocols inside and out, which is what you're going to need to do before you take that exam. Otherwise, you're just asking to fail. So, the question for exam objective 2 reads, as an ethical hacker, you have discovered a security vulnerability associated with a protocol used for sending terminal commands over a network. Your client is concerned about potential risks and wants to identify the protocol along with its incorrect associated port number. Which of the following options correctly matches the protocol with its associated port number and describes the security risk. A. Telnet, port 80, secure and encrypted communication. B. SSH, port 443, resistant to unauthorized access. C. SNMP, port 161, susceptible to eavesdropping. D. RDP, port 3389, prone to brute force attacks. E. Telnet, port 23, vulnerable to password interception. F. Telnet, port 443, resistant to unauthorized access. G. SSH, port 22, vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. H. SSH, port 3389, secure password transmission. I. SNMP, port 80, vulnerable to unauthorized data access. J. SNMP, port 22, insecure device communication. Your answer coming up in 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is Telnet, port 23. It is vulnerable to password interception. Now, I'll read out this explanation here, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we should best go about answering that question. Telnet is a protocol that operates on port 23 and is used for sending commands to a computer's terminal over a network. However, it is inherently insecure as it does not use encryption. This means that Telnet can be vulnerable to password interception by attackers who can intercept credentials during transmission. It's important to note that Telnet should be avoided due to its security risks, and SSH is a more secure alternative for remote terminal access. So guys, basically, Telnet, it's just a no-no. You don't use it for anything because it's just open text. Anyone can get in the middle of that and just see what data you're sending over. If you log into something over Telnet, boom, great, they've got your username and password. Your business is done for. Use SSH. Telnet is a huge security risk, and all the way from the A++ up to the cybersecurity analyst plus Telnet, it's just like, if you see it, don't use it, forget about it. All throughout every single one of those exams, throw Telnet in the trash, okay? Completely forget about it. Now, let's have a read through the question. We'll get to the incorrect answers there in a second, but let's have a read through this question. As we're reading through the question, we want to be able to identify amongst this complicated question that is 5 lines long, what is the actual question? Okay, whenever I see a long question like this, the first thing I do, I kind of skim through it and I skip to the last sentence, because sometimes the last sentence is really all you need to know. So in the instance of this question here, that is the case. I can skip to the last sentence and it just simply says, which of the following options correctly matches the protocol with its associated port number and describes the security risk? That's the only thing I need to know as when it comes to what I'm doing for this question. I can ignore the rest of that jargon. I can ignore the rest of that question. It's unnecessary information that I'm just going to read through, okay? So, that's a cool little exam tip. Sometimes if you see a lot of lines, skip to the end. Sometimes the question is stated very clearly in one sentence and you can save some time that way. Not always, but sometimes. Okay, here are the incorrect answers. If you would like to pause the screen and read through those. And just as before, I highly recommend, particularly for ports, protocols, and functions, that you are able to, again, draw this table out purely from the power of your memory, not copying it down, from the power of memory, because you are gonna need to know these off by heart to be able to confidently take that exam, okay? Feel free to pause that video and jot that down. Or, of course, you can grab it at my learning guide over at journeytocyber.com. Okay, I promise I won't plug myself again. Probably will. Let's move on to the next question. Exam objective, I think this is 3 now. The question reads, as a computer technician setting up a workstation, you are considering USB connectivity options. Which USB 3.2 generation offers a data transfer rate of 20 gigabit per second? A. USB 3.2 Gen 1. B. USB 3.2 Gen 2. C. USB 3.2 Gen 1 times 2. D. USB 3.2 Gen 2 times 2. Whoa. Your answer coming up in 3, 2, 1. Your answer is D, USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2. Among the USB 3.2 generations, USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2 provides a data transfer rate of 20 gigabits per second. This high-speed connection is suitable for scenarios where maximizing data transfer speed is crucial. So basically, guys, you're going to need to know your speeds. You've got the speeds for the incorrect answers up here as well, but you need to know the speeds of your USBs. Pretty much need to know the speeds of all your cables. It's a lot of information to cover, ridiculous amount of information, but you do need to know it. Okay, so go back towards the video if you need to see that, but we're going to move on to the next one. This question might frustrate a couple, but we're going to do it anyway, and we'll talk about it after. If you get frustrated, that's okay. We'll talk about why it's frustrating after the fact. The question reads, you are the IT manager of an e-commerce business aiming to avoid partial or shared ownership of hardware. Which cloud computing model best aligns with your requirements? A, private cloud. B, public cloud. C, hybrid cloud. D, community cloud. All right, and 3, 2, 1. You're not going to like this, I don't think, but the answer for this question is B, public cloud. I'll read through the explanation and then we'll talk about it, okay? The public cloud is the ideal fit for your scenario. It allows you to access and utilize hardware and resources off-site without the need for ownership. You can dynamically adjust resources according to your website traffic, paying only for what you use. This model ensures you have complete control over your resources while avoiding hardware ownership and sharing. Public clouds like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure offer the flexibility, scalability, and cost-effectiveness that you are seeking. So let's take a moment here. There's a good chance that you might have offered private cloud here, and that's a reasonable answer. This is an example of one of the more tricky questions that you might get for your exam, where if you rush through reading the question and you really don't think about it, you might kind of get tripped up on this. And it's even possible that private cloud could be a correct answer. Hear me out. Let's carefully read through the question. You are the IT manager of an e-commerce business aiming to avoid partial or shared ownership of hardware. Okay, so you do not want to share ownership with anyone, right? You don't want to share ownership with anybody at all. That immediately gets rid of community cloud, because community cloud, the whole thing is you're sharing with someone. So now you're left with private cloud, which is where you own everything. You own all of the hardware. It's all yours. Public cloud, which is where you own nothing. You don't own any of the hardware. You're just renting the space, right? You don't own any of the hardware. And a hybrid cloud where you might have, it's a mix of any of them. Okay. And then it also says aiming to avoid partial. Now, when I hear the word partial, what I think to myself is, you're aiming to avoid any part of ownership. You don't want 1% ownership. You don't want 2% ownership. You don't want 3% ownership. You don't want 4. You don't want 50. You don't want 70, right? So when I read this question, I'm thinking public, because that avoids me owning any part of that cloud. Okay, now this is the trickiest question in the whole thing, and for the real exam, hopefully they'll spell it out a bit more for you, but the purpose for this question isn't necessarily for you to get your head around these concepts, right? Because hopefully you know the difference between a private cloud, a public cloud, a hybrid cloud, a community cloud. That's one of the easiest things in the whole exam. The purpose is to get you thinking. You might read a question and think you immediately know the answer, but you might have to go back and read it a second time and really think about what some of the terms mean. Because it might seem obvious, but it's actually not. If you want to avoid partial ownership, does that mean you want to make sure you own everything? Or does that mean that you want to make sure that you don't even own part of it, right? So think about that one, I guess. But if you want to debate me on that, debate me in the comments below. I understand why you might want to. I understand why you might want to now that I look at it. But yeah, that being said, here are the incorrect answers, right? What a private cloud is, hybrid cloud is, community cloud is. We're going to move on to the final question, exam objective 5, the troubleshooting. Okay, here we go. The question reads, you notice that your smartphone's performance is sluggish, and it seems to be using more CPU resources than usual. What might be the cause of this issue? A, the device is overheating. B, poor or no connectivity. C, malware running in the background. D, the battery health is deteriorating. 3, 2, 1. The answer is C, malware running in the background. When your device's performance is sluggish and CPU usage is high without active use, it could be due to malware running in the background, consuming resources. So let's read through this again. Your smartphone's performance is sluggish, so it's slow, right? That can happen for a wide variety of reasons. And it seems to be using more CPU resources than usual. Okay, so it could be sluggish due to a wide variety of factors, but excess CPU resources, that means there's something running. So you might open up your phone and look through it and see, I only have one thing running. Why is the CPU so high? It might be because there's malware operating in the background using your CPU, which is why that usage is so high. So high CPU resources, despite you not using anything, is always a good indication of malware. Now, here's the explanation for some of those incorrect answers or some of those other ones, right? That being said, guys, pause the video here if you want to read that. That being said, that is it. If you want to get my learning guide that you can use to pair perfectly well with Professor Mess's video series on the A+ 1101 exam, you can grab that over at journeytocyber.com. It's only $5. It's so affordable and, in my opinion, the best out there in terms of all the books you can buy. And if you want to grab these practice exams where all these questions came from, look at all these, oh my goodness gracious, then you can grab that over at journeytocyber.com as well for only 30 Australian dollars. So super cheap. You can pass the A+ exam for a total study cost of $35 with my learning guide, practice exams, and Professor Mess's free online video series. So go over there, grab those. Let me know anything you want to know in the comments down below. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one.